Yes, hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to this session on enhancing resilience on the UNU Climate Resilience Initiative, where we will analyze on the lessons learned on governance and emergency responses related to the 2021 floods that ravaged through Western Europe. Following these devastating floods in the Rhine-Meuse region in July 2021, the issue of climate change and preparedness for extreme events gained significant attention in the countries in the Benelux region and around. In response to that, the United Nations University institutes that are active in that region, in Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, initiated the UNU Climate Resilience Initiative, which was a collaborative effort to share knowledge and drive proactive adaptation and transformation, building upon the analysis of what happened during those events. So building on the research and the outcomes, they organized a UNU Flood Knowledge Summit in June 2021, where different stakeholders, including affected citizens, first responders, authorities, researchers, and civil society actors exchanged their experiences and fostered dialogue for more collective learning. The initiative report that resulted from the work and the summit was launched in June 2023, nearly 2 years after the event, because of the complexity of the analysis and the many topics involved surrounding the event. The report underscores the importance of climate adaptation, innovation, and building resilience in relation to escalating climate change risks, specifically for the Benelux region, where we identified some key areas that required further research and urgent action. Ultimately, we hope to bridge the gap between research and practice and facilitate effective responses to climate-related challenges through collaboration, knowledge sharing, and proactive measures. Today we have a panel from different UNU institutions and Heidelberg University to reflect on what happened during those floods and what are the key messages for further policy and research. But first we will listen to two welcome messages from our UNU institution, starting with Professor Philippe de Lombarde, who is the director of United CRIS, which is the UNU Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies based in Bruges. Please show
Dear colleagues,
the message.
Panelists, experts gathered at the Benelux Pavilion, I'm greeting you from a rather grey and cold Bruges. On behalf of UNU CRIS and the UNU Partner Institutes, I would like to welcome you to this panel, which adds one additional piece to the great and complex puzzle that you are laying at COP. The UNU team will navigate the discussion drawing from the journey of the UNU Climate Resilience Initiative, which was a response by the UNU institutes in Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands, along with European partners, to the 2021 European floods. As you might know, the floods of July 2021 in the Rhine-Meuse region claimed over 240 lives and caused billions of damage, leaving an enduring impact on communities and citizens. The Climate Resilience Initiative, aimed at drawing lessons from the events and contribute to fortify climate resilience, foster regional cooperation for disaster risk reduction, and evaluate the climate and disaster policies framework within the multi-level governance context. In this panel, UNU researchers will present insights from the reports that were produced, based on the data that was gathered and the consultations that were held with stakeholders. Of particular interest for UNU CRIS, which is our institute, are the governance aspects of possible policy or societal responses. Organizing effective disaster management and strengthening climate resilience is not only about data gathering, listening to the communities and proposing technical solutions. Equally crucial is how the societal response is governed. As this episode of floodings happened in the border region of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, the case shows very well that horizontal cross-border coordination and cooperation is essential as well as vertical coordination and cooperation across governance levels. We hope that we have contributed with our work to deal with these complexities. Together with the other UNU institutes, we will continue our work on climate resilience, moving beyond this case and connecting it to other cases and experiences worldwide. Let me finish then with wishing you all a very productive panel. Thank you very much.
Yes, and then we also have some welcome words from Professor Bartel van de Walle, who is the director of UNU Merit, which is the Economic and Social Research Institute on Innovation and Technology based in Maastricht.
Dear distinguished panelists and participants, as director of UNU Merit, it's my pleasure to welcome you here at this special session at the Benelux Pavilion at COP28. Today, you have gathered here in this session to address one of the most pressing issues of our time, the impact of climate-induced natural disasters and the resilience that is required to deal with it. United Nations University has taken initiative in 2021 to think and act upon this new situation. We're working together with institutes in Belgium and Germany after the floods that occurred here in 2021 in this region, where the impact of climate change became very visible and close to the inhabitants of this region. With this initiative, we did not only want to react to the disaster, to the floods, but we also wanted to ensure that information that is collected in the aftermath of disaster is shared among scientists, among the public, and among policymakers, in order to better address the resilience that is required to deal with disasters like these. With this institute, we want to focus on innovation as a key enabler of the change that is needed to enable and increase resilience and to reduce the impact of climate-induced disasters. Innovation can play different roles at different stages of the response to such disasters. We can, through innovative solutions, come up with new adaptive tools and methods to better deal with the impact of the disaster. Secondly, in the longer term, where we need transformative change and transformative solutions, also there we need innovation to help us think how we can create that process, how we can have the buy-in in the process from the people and the policymakers. Thirdly, we are focusing on innovation to also increase the commitment and the buy-in and the participation of the people affected by the disaster. Innovation can play different roles in enabling the local people to be resilient and to deal with the impact. And fourth and last, innovation can of course assist in converting challenges into opportunities. It is clear that the current climate change-induced disasters pose tremendous challenges, some of which we have never seen before, like in this region here in Belgium, Netherlands and Germany. However, we are now having the tools and the methods and the theories and the research to try to develop these new solutions that we desperately need. I wish all of you at this panel a fruitful discussion and exchange of ideas to help us deal with these challenges today. And I wish you all a great panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, so these were a few of the opening words, and I would like to give the floor now to Prof. Nidhi Nahab Hatla, who is senior researcher at UNU CRIS in Bruges and was involved in the initiative from the start. Dear Nidhi, could you share a few insights from the initiative reports and the work you've been doing throughout the project, please?
Thank you, Charlotte, and I will be speaking also in the context of a program lead on nature, climate and health at UNU CRIS. CRIS stands for Comparative Regional Integration Studies. As we are based in Belgium, and we work closely to Brussels, our main agenda of operation is to also assess and evaluate governance structures, competencies, delegation of authority in response and recovery, and in context of disaster risk management and climate resilience building, we use that lens while responding to the European floods of 2021 via the UNU Climate Resilience Initiative. I'll share with you the structure of the structural framework that we use to assess gaps and needs was also to understand complexities, uncertainties, data gaps, information, the challenges in information flow, and also the knowledge uptake by communities. This was a spectrum of issues, and we divided that into several work packages, worked across the stakeholder groups, right from ministries to communities to volunteer groups, universities and young professionals or young people who also volunteered in response and recovery. I'll give you some insights from this. The multifaceted impacts of disaster also revealed that there is a big gap in risk perception. Sometimes the economic stability, especially in global north, also translates into some feeling of climate proofing, and the perception of risk remains pretty unclear to communities who have not seen a shock event. And I think that translates also into if they are exposed to that event, or their families or friends are exposed to that event, that also translates into trauma. So response and recovery may feature, we understood that response and recovery could feature building back, but the state at national and subnational level also needs other mechanisms related to support services like providing psychosocial support, and we'll hear more about it from our team members. I also want to emphasize on some other aspects that we looked at, ensuring losses. So the insurance to disasters, I'll talk specifically about Belgium here, has evolved in the last 30 years. At the state level, at the subnational level. And it has become more comprehensive. It has also involved the private sector, and it has configured a public-private partnership to disaster risk governance. And I think that is a good opportunity to see that the losses are covered, but only the infrastructure or asset losses are covered. The loss of some things like an emotional loss is not featured in these kind of paradigms and pathways. So these are some sort of gaps which we need to strengthen our emergency response systems to be more comprehensive, to be more inclusive. So also looking into the current emergency response systems, where the first responders, the civil protection agencies are primarily involved. The other soft agencies who look into health, well-being only come later. And sometimes the connection between the horizontal and vertical level of institution and organizations, effort and response systems are pretty I would say there's a time lag, or they are not really coordinated in the time scale dimension. That is another point we wanted to highlight. We have a special report on the Belgium case study that we'll be launching soon. We have a draft here, and we want to share some points in the second round with you. But here I'm going to just talk about a comparative context, the report that we launched from UNU Climate Resilience Initiative in the July of this year after 2 years of research, to also do a comparative context. Let's recognize and acknowledge that the area that got flooded is also a cross-border region. While we need national authorities, national institutions, or subnational provincial level agencies to respond, there is also a great deal of cross-border collaboration that might be needed to ensure that response systems protection measures are well coordinated. So we emphasized on the need for more robust transboundary cross-border collaboration, regional strengthening to disaster risk reduction. It's not just a national agenda, it has to be a regional agenda if you're sharing resources like river basin, wetlands, water bodies. So I think I'll sort of pause here, but I'll also conclude by saying that we do diagnostics as part one of our research exercise, but looking beyond, understanding based on one event, we also want to understand the transformative pathways that will help us to build more resilient communities in the future. Towards that, we also explored pathways like ecosystem-based adaptation or ecosystem-based disaster risk resilience strategies that are more converging to nature-positive solutions rather than only infrastructural interventions that are hard structures. So also looking into alternatives that can give us more disaster protection, that can go a long way in creating or co-creating resilient structures, and also are nature-friendly. So I'll pause here, Charlotte.
Thank you, Nidhi. I hear you talking quite a bit about connection between response systems not being coordinated well as on cross-border collaboration. Are there any questions from the audience? Because I would like to ask, do you have any concrete examples where this type of cross-border collaboration was not coordinated well, and where the report sees specific targets for improvement?
Okay, so maybe I'll point to one, the deployment of early warning systems. So European agencies at the supranational level, call it at the European level, are very strong in data production and production of early warning signals and systems. But how this information flows across to stakeholders at subnational, local, and cross-border region is pretty not clear. And the time lag, when a disaster happens, you have to operate within 24 hours. You have to respond. Starting from 6 hours to 24 hours, you have to complete that operation of response and recoveries beginning. So I think that time is very crucial for the information flow to flow from supranational to local level. And then delegation of authority. Even if an official knows, if an official has information, has access to information, does he or she have authority to act on that information? The delegation of authority to formulate some action plans by themselves. So I think those are things that needs to be brought into the forefront of disaster risk governance at local to supranational levels.
Okay, I have a question from the audience.
Thank you very much. Jean-Pascal Van Ypersel, former IPCC Vice Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for your explanation. Unfortunately, I have to leave in a few minutes, but I'd like to ask a question also about the information flow. How are the results or the preliminary results or the results of your work, of your research, transferred to the Belgian government's with an S at the end, because it's both the federal level, which now has a climate crisis center, and the regional government who are confronted to the issues, and how have those results been received there?
All right, so maybe I'll answer that in 2 points. First, we developed a regional report that we launched last year that had a comparative context of stakeholder mapping from Germany, from Netherlands, and from Belgium to understand the best practices of data collection, data flows, and information knowledge management. So we did a comparative context between 3 countries that were directly impacted by that episode. Then we dived deep into the Belgian case studies, where we looked into the data gaps, information gaps, and knowledge flows within Belgium as a state, so to speak. 1 or 2 points that we understood was that the early warning systems are also should be linguistically diversified, depending on the heterogeneity of the population. And I do understand that for now it was deployed in some specific language, but perhaps in certain zones where the linguistic diversity context is applied, it should also be taken note of. Second thing is that such kind of information flows should be tailored to the socio-economic spectrum of that community that is impacted. If the community is composed of elderly people, don't expect them to use smartphones and tabs and tune into every kind of digital medium and get information and build their capacity. They need other kind of alternative measures. We need to use all alternative measures that are available through phone messages, SMS, or through radio, or through TV, or all the other kinds of messages that are available. Third, I think we need to rebuild community response modalities. So it is a contract between the state and the citizens, for the state to protect the citizens, but I think the state is not a god. So I think we need to build community responders who are aware of risks, risk measurements, and risk responding. There are agencies and institutions, but there should be community volunteers, and I think that is some of the messages we are trying to give. We are also trying to suggest the Belgian Health Ministry in particular that the health response should be a part of disaster response, and disaster response should be a part of health policies. So health diplomacy in climate diplomacy and climate in health diplomacy. Why? Because people, the shock and trauma of an event stays with people for a much longer time than we anticipate. We are even studying people after 2.5 years of the incident, and they still recall the shock and the trauma that they have felt after witnessing or getting exposed to the incident. So I think these are things that we want to boost in the Belgium policies and institutions.
A small intervention.
Very quickly, thank you very much, but you didn't answer my question. How was this information in the practice transferred to the governments with an S, and how was it received?
Okay, so what we have done is...
Because you talked about the communities, all that
Okay.
is very good, but what about the governments? Did I listen to you?
The government, we tried to organize a flood knowledge summit after 1 year of the flood in 2022 in Maastricht. We brought all the all the representative agencies and stakeholders to Netherlands. We had stakeholders from Germany. We had health ministry and disaster response teams from Netherlands. We had stakeholders from community welfare organizations, volunteers, researchers. We brought 120 people in one room, and they talked to each other for 2 days. And they promised that they will take some messages from this dialogue sessions and back and integrate and refine their policies, point one. Point two, we are developing a report that will be launched in another 2 months. So it's particularly focused on Belgium. And then this report is something that we ensure that will highlight some key points that might be of interest to the government, and I only can assume that they will listen to us because we are providing some very good knowledge here in this report.
Maybe
Does that answer?
A concluding question on that. Do you feel that the connection can be made when a researcher level develops reports and research outcome? Do you feel that the dialogue with the policy level is there? Is it sufficient, or what can we do to improve this?
Well, we know that this is not table research, because this research has been done after a series of interviews, reviewing all the documentation that the government at national and subnational level launched, doing discourse analysis from statements made by the head of the state to the local volunteer groups. So this is an empirical research, a practical aggregation of information and data and knowledge. And I think this may really interest policymakers if they are serious about taking disaster risk governance to the next level.
Great. All right, let's continue that discussion during the panel. Then go now on the health impact. So we have our COP28. We're being, let's say, not referring to the health COP, but there was one thematic day specifically focused on health. And for this project, there's been an effort to analyze the health perspective within the different countries affected. And so, Sanae, could you please tell us a bit more about the work you did in that regard, and what are the main outcomes from the research coming out of this? Thank you.
Thank you.
If also possible, if you could introduce some of the work you are currently doing as part of the team at UNU Merit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome to this session. I'm Sanae Okamoto from UNU Merit. I'm located in the Netherlands. And I'm a behavioral scientist, background in psychology and behavioral economics. I have been co-leading this, the UNU, the Climate Resilience Initiative, to, as a focal point of the Merit side. And so first, maybe I would like to, emphasize the work we have done from Merit side. We had more than 20 researchers, colleagues, and students got involved in this climate resilience initiative work. And there are several touch points from our angle, like governance, the cross-border governance research, also done together with the colleagues from EHS and CRIS, and also some of the colleagues who are focused on innovation-related topics did a lot of research in nature-based solutions in the regions. And also several colleagues also did several interviews and risk analysis, especially around the insurance perspectives in Germany. And also some colleagues also done several studies in infrastructures and also like innovative solutions in the utilization of the digital applications. And also, I have been co-leading the work package, which are focusing on community response and preparedness. And several of our members also did interviews and with local stakeholders, local household. And we learned quite a lot of the insights, like emotional impacts and psychological distress came out from this, the 2021 Western floods. And also we learned several post-trauma clinics has become available for many cases, and also several people also had the chance to talk with these practitioners. But also what we learned is several of my colleagues just mentioned, this psychological impact lasts a lot longer than expected. And then this post-trauma clinics has become available, but the availabilities were limited, and also the period these services are provided was also got shorter than we actually needed. And this kind of like direct impact the population faced was very, unique in a way that was never been happened before. So, and not only like direct impact of flood and experience of evacuation and so on, but also after disaster, the people need to demolish houses, lose all the precious items and the family photos, many things that are replaceable with the insurance and money. So that kind of things kept going, as also my colleague Nidhi mentioned, this emotional burden and emotional impact is so strong, and many of the interviewees also answered that they feel fear of future upcoming the disasters because it's very uncertain. So these are some takeaways we gained from our research. And then based on that, we also developed, the policy brief series. So this is a little bit more beyond the Benelux region, the more global views. So this week we published 3 papers of a policy brief series from our website you can download. And these are focusing on all kind of multiple disaggregated impacts on mental health from climate change induced the situations. And also we talk about the risk factors, vulnerabilities, inequalities. And this one we also cover a lot about disaster-related impact. And then third, we also closed with opportunity solutions and what we can do for future generations. And as Charlotte mentioned in the beginning, this COP is very big milestone for health community. This was the very first health COP day was we had, and this is of course it's a milestone, but we need to keep working on this, make it really accessible and actionable, because the worldwide the health budget is allocated a rather small amount of national budget, and in that small health budget, only 2%, average of most of countries, only 2% given to mental health support. This is absolute lack of capacity to cover all the situations. And even without considering climate change, the mental health burden is suffering for many people. So that's why we need to emphasize the importance of not only of course, the building resilience in the society is very important, but that we can do only we have a psychological resilience. So this is my takeaway from the research we have so far.
Thank you, Dr. Okamoto. Sane, for providing some insights. I have a question. From the analysis, do you see mental health impact, psychosocial well-being being different across the affected countries? And has there been any link made on the governance and the organization of the emergency response in relation to differences, if they are there?
So I think the differences across the countries, especially the Belgium and Germany, there was a lot more impact. And this 2021 flood, the Netherlands side, we didn't have, compared relatively less, the physical impact. So that's why the response, more like the reaction from the local populations slightly vary. And for example, in the case in Germany, like many people also lost income sources, like the farmland got flood damage, and then, you know, that's a very severe income security, and these sort of things are more like direct impact. And I think that depends on the government, it depends on the country, how to approach this, you know, the impact they're quite different. So that's other differences. Also, my colleague Nidhi also covered this element earlier, and I think this cross-border vulnerabilities, but also like the beyond the border, you know, the collaboration, the shared knowledge, and also emphasize in the research and the lesson learned is very important.
Thank you. So then we move further to Dr. Maximilian Jungmann, political scientist and executive manager at the Heidelberg Center for the Environment, which is based at Heidelberg University. And I think you will reflect a bit on the situation in Germany. And I'll give you the floor now. And please could start his PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you so much. Yes, I will zoom into the German case and the lessons learned from Germany, from the 2021 floods in Western Germany, to first recap what actually happened in Germany in 2021 in the summer, and to put that into context, and then what are the short-term and long-term lessons learned from that. This is one of the most prominent pictures that we saw in the media after the events unfolded, and what was particularly shocking in the region was that what was formerly small peaks and smaller rivers, due to very heavy rain, turned into massive streams where we didn't see that before. Actually, we saw similar events only 100 years before in Western Germany. And the regions where this that were affected was mostly in Western Germany, in Rhineland-Palatinate, in North Rhine-Westphalia. And we saw that more than 180 people died because of the events, and there was more than 40 billion euros in financial costs, mostly infrastructure, buildings, and so on, and also major mental health challenges, as we just heard, that are not operationalized in terms of financial loss. So the 40 billion does not necessarily cover the loss and damage in terms of mental health and other health risks or loss in income. This is mostly focused on infrastructure and buildings and the need for reconstruction in the region. And the two rivers that were mostly affected were the Erf and the Ahr in Germany, and the regions around them, the Ahrtal and Erftal. But the floods affected larger areas in Western Germany. What we can learn in terms of emergency management, so what happened during the crisis when it unfolded, some reports argue that there was a lacking preparedness for so-called black swan events. Black swan events, this goes back to the book by Nassim Alexander Taleb, who explains black swan events are highly unlikely but have a very high impact if they unfold. For example, 9/11 is described as a black swan event. And since the situation in Western Germany was only comparable to the events in 1804 and 1910, it was highly unlikely that such a major event would happen. But since it happened, it had a tremendous impact and lots of loss and damage in the region. It had a strong effect on the people on the ground, and also lots of people on the ground actually acted very quickly. We saw lots of emergency response by people on the ground, lots of support by neighbors and so on. But where there was harsh criticism is in terms of the administration, the lack of leadership that people said, because apparently the German Weather Service, the DWD, expected very heavy rainfall already 3 days before the events occurred. However, the emergency response system did not work properly, and there was even court cases afterwards against the district administrator of Ahrweiler, which is one of the affected regions, to investigate how the crisis management actually worked and who has to take responsibility for some of the loss and damage that was covered there. And it is not entirely clear yet from the investigations if people could have actually been saved, but there was harsh criticism for the leadership and for how the emergency response worked right away. There were also, as we heard, governance challenges, some local ones. For example, in terms of the early warning systems, we have early warning systems in place in Germany. However, we also see that nationwide, some of the older early warning systems in terms of sirens, for example, have been downgraded over the years and uninstalled. And we have a national warning app called Nina that you can download on your app, and you can get a warning if there is a hazard, but lots of people don't have that app, and we didn't use early warning systems as in other regions in the world. For example, if you've ever been to New York City, you get a warning directly independent of what you have on the phone, directly through the system if there's, for example, an active shooter. So one of the lessons learned is that we also have to make sure that everyone gets the warning signals, and since then we have a warning day in Germany. So once a year, we test the early warning systems, and for people that aren't familiar with that, it's quite curious because at a certain time during the day, you can hear it everywhere, and it goes off on your phone and every system that we have. So that is one of the lessons learned in terms of early warning systems, but as we heard before, we also need to streamline and enhance the lines of communication. So if we have the information that something is going to happen, who is responsible, and how do we inform each other, and what do we actually do? Do we have standard operating procedures, for example, in place? What do we do? Where do we go when something happens? We talked about the events in Japan, for example, when earthquakes happen. It's very clear you have training on what to do if this happens. There was very little training in Germany before. Then regional coordination, we already heard about that extensively, but also in terms of national and international governance challenges, we heard from the report that it's important to have more precise vulnerability assessments, for example, to integrate the perspective of stakeholders, which is why I'm very glad to hear that you conducted so many interviews and did discourse analysis, because when we're looking at the long-term effects, it's essential that we understand how we can sustainably adapt and build resilience in the region. What we're seeing now is lots of claims of people that have lost their property and that want to rebuild it exactly where it was before and the way it was before. So we have to understand what drives people, what are their interests, to integrate what we know in academia on how we can, for example, harness the potential of nature-based solutions. It's not just that we know this is an option, but we need to understand how effective stakeholder management can work. And then, of course, the really important lesson learned of cross-border information management in terms of language barriers or diversity of language, coordination, and importantly, exchange of lessons learned, so that we can identify what worked in which regions and how can policy diffusion work as well. How can we effectively learn from each other and make that comparable as well. What is really interesting from my perspective, and I will close with this, is also the change in awareness and also attribution studies that came out after the events. Quite shortly after the events in Western Germany happened, we saw some first publications from attribution studies that assess the impact of climate change on these particular events. And before, whenever extreme weather events happen, we had to say, when we were asked, for example, by journalists, is climate change the cause for these extreme weather events? Our response was always, we know that climate change contributes and exacerbates extreme weather events. However, we cannot draw a direct line between climate change and this one. Now we can do that because attribution studies have become better, and that can also lead to shifting responsibility, for example. Who is responsible for the lives lost lost. And we saw that this can be used by NGOs, by lawyers, for example, in litigation cases, and so on, and not just in adaptation, but also mitigation, because if we mitigate more, then we also reduce some of the barriers in terms of adaptation. Yes, these are some of the lessons learned from the case in Germany, and I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really insightful presentation. I would like to ask a question about the last slide. So what did come out of that research in terms of attribution, and how did that relate also to the harsh criticism on the leadership? Mm-hmm. Has there been a connection made there?
So these studies that I showed here mostly look at what is the connection between climate change and the the impact that we see. Is this directly connected to climate change? And yes, these studies conclude that climate change directly contributed to these specific extreme weather events. And if you then go one step further, you can say, well, we see that this loss and damage is connected to climate change. So if we want to understand the consequences of our inaction in terms of mitigation, it can have this price, for example. And if you then compare it to the lack of funding that we're seeing right now in Germany, we're discussing how we can get 60 billion euros for a transformation fund, because the German government had some issues with providing that funding for programs that they have initiated. And you put that into context of the 40 billion euros that were required or that were caused in terms of loss and damage just with this one singular event, then you have a different relationship to the price that it takes for mitigation, resilience building, and sustainable adaptation. For the consequences in terms of emergency management and crisis management, we had one person that was particularly particularly critiqued in this case, but also there were very serious court cases, and we can see that the responsibility of district managers, for example, is more crucial than it used to be. And there were claims where people were arguing that we knew that there wasn't enough preparedness in that region, and we knew that this region was at risk, but it wasn't taken seriously enough. So if this happens, then decision makers, policy makers are in a different position than before as well.
Thank you. So I would like to now go quickly back to Nidhi, who will share a few insights on the governance report that will be released soon, and what are some of the takeaways from the analysis there. And I think also the link with the media is relevant here, because a lot of the research was also based on media reports as well. So a few insights, and then we'll move to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Charlotte, and I promise that I'll be brief. I think I'll start with our exercise on mapping blind spots in the risk cycle, particularly for the case of Belgium. We highlighted that unprecedented events and the perception of risk is largely lacking among citizens, policymakers, and politicians. So risk communication, risk assessment, and the modalities for addressing multifaceted risk. One other conceptual but also very relevant point is about the idea of mixing up the notions of emergency situation, crisis situation, and exceptional situations, where in theory and documentations and how systems are triggered to respond to these settings, and how one setting then transitions into another setting in the course of time, and the intensity of that situation also remains a little bit blurred. So this is something that we also observed. I would also emphasize the lack of cross-border collaboration, also at the within the state, federal to local, but also across the states sharing that resource. So transboundary cooperation is minimum. There are civil protection agencies that are operating through some level of cooperation, but there's a lot of potential and capacity to extend beyond. I would also emphasize that the media discourse really provided us with an insight that some of the comments, the discourse is pretty. I would say it's not really reflecting to the gaps in the needs, but sometimes it goes into a more of a blame game discourse. But largely, there is one sentence that sums it all. And this I would like to read from one of the stakeholders without quoting the name. The rain also washed away our trust in politics. And that sentence says a lot. One thing which, there might be a number of concerning points that we highlighted as in terms of coordination, cooperation, competencies, but there are also good points. And one of the good points that we really want to highlight is that of solidarity. Between public groups, between volunteers who came from all over the region to support recovery and response, either complementing or coordinating or supporting regional and federal agencies and their agents. So I think that is something of a big takeaway, that we can invest in organizing and coalescing these volunteer groups, these citizens who feel that they can play a role in supporting others who are in the need. So I think sort of formalizing, structuring, or incentivizing those groups. Another quick thing that I want to also highlight is that insurance sector, though it's pretty robust in its operations, we need to build capacity of people how to efficiently and without stress uptake the insurance insurance capacities that exist at the state level. So building the uptake of communities and citizens, because people find themselves in the situation of stress, filling multiple forms, visiting multiple agencies, and they are also dealing with the loss of their assets, their family members in some cases. So this is a multiple burden, and we can maybe help mitigate some of those burdens by through community activities, by training them ahead. If this happens, then this is like standards of practice that our colleague Max was sort of highlighting. I'll pause here.
Thank you, Nidhi. How is UNU Chris planning to disseminate the work for this report? And what are the main points that you want to kind of transfer to the policy level here?
So I'll limit it to three simple points. First, we are training many young professionals from different faculties, from different universities in Belgium, but also across the region, to come and work with us as interns doing their master's, PhD, postdoc work, so that they're able to see and work and sort of tailor their research to fill some of these gaps and needs. Point one. In terms of taking this from science to policy, we will be organizing the launch event for this report, to bringing on board stakeholders from federal to subnational level. In terms of working with academic institutions, we like to see that these knowledge products also become a part of curriculum development. So there is a sort of a culture of experiential learning rather than just theoretical learning. So different entry points to ensure that knowledge and information flows from documents to action.
Great. All right, let's move to the other panelists and reflect a bit further on that question. And I think a lot of, not saying concerns, but there's debate about how can we actively engage with involved governments, either on the national level but also interregional, and how could they get involved in initiatives such as the UNU project to ultimately enhance their own climate governance. Sanae, do you have a few insights from your end?
So I think I have a few points, like 4 points. So first one is like more like the commitment to collaboration of all the government side. And we believe this climate resilience initiative can be like a touch point for this the interactions, and then to we can enhance the the recognition of the shared nature of climate change, but also climate change induced disasters, and then try to co-develop joint solutions. And another one would be the information sharing and learning, because these cross-border vulnerabilities, we share almost all the natural infrastructures. So that's why exchange of knowledge and also best practices, case studies and lessons, and then also the language should be more like translated, because this should not be barrier, but it should be more like the enhancing point. And otherwise, more like investment and more like the inclusion and the participation of research and innovation. So we have a very nice the collaboration in the research scheme, and facilitating this kind of research partnerships, not only among academia, but also the public-private partnerships together with also private sectors and public entities. We can develop the research partnerships and then try to support innovation and then integrate all the new knowledge. And then the last one is the stakeholder engagement. Like we can try to emphasize and also try to facilitate the better regulation and the policies for emergency response and also warning systems. But if the community level awareness and the preparedness is still not there yet, it will take longer to reach to the end users of this the emergency, the warning services. So that's why increasing the level of preparedness, this community engagement is very important. And for that, we need to have a very wide engagement and involvement of different levels of the national structures, not only from top government, but also local government and also local communities and also schools and like local partners need to be mobilized to develop more like the training systems or awareness sharing systems about the disaster and what to do in case of this situation happen. What type of emergency response you need to pay attention? Do you know where the shelter you can go to? Do you know how to get there? Where is the touch point you can get all the necessary information? These kind of things, of course, if you look and search on the website and try to understand it, of course you can get this information, but it's not hands-on. So like every touch point, such as the schools and university and the companies need to have this kind of things, the dissemination of the touch point. This would be really fundamental.
Did you see these dynamics play out in Germany, Max, or what was the situation there?
Well, we see that there is definitely learning experiences in Germany, as I mentioned, for example, in terms of the early warning system. When it comes to information distribution, we would probably have to go into the affected region if something changed there. Speaking from where we're based in Heidelberg, it's not really that high up on the agenda at this point, and we're working with local governance decision makers all the time with the Heidelberg Center for the Environment, because we're an inter and transdisciplinary research incubator, and we work with the city administration of Heidelberg, Mannheim, and so on. And you can see how the agenda always shifts from time to time. In recent years, it has been a major focus on heat, although we also have a large river with the Neckar in Heidelberg, and then in Mannheim also the Rhine. The focus has been on heat, and we've been working with the city on heat adaptation plans, for example, local adaptation plans, how this is fed into the broader dimension of climate change and health. Then mental health comes in, infectious diseases, for example. In Heidelberg now we have the Aedes aegypti, the tiger mosquito that can survive in Heidelberg and could transmit dengue, for example. So you see that the political agenda is affected by, like, it waxes and wanes depending on what's currently up on the media agenda and which findings are currently distributed. Now, the focus has been on other areas, but flood will come back once something will happen, and then we will be up in the discussion again on that. When it comes to information material, I think there's definitely a need to reach people that aren't as close to academia and these circles that we're usually in. If we look at vulnerable groups, they often don't have the required information, and it's often not presented in a way that everyone can easily understand it. And I think, and that was also mentioned before, that is something that needs to be worked on much more than before.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as well, I think I've also heard concerns about the fact that policy level does not, quote unquote, take the flood seriously, in the sense that there's debate about the frequency of and the intensity of a next event. Do you see that also play out in your interaction with government officials from a research point of view in Germany?
So, from a political science perspective in general, in a liberal democracy, you always have terms, and you can see that the priority is focused on, like, what's the term, when are the next elections, and which topics are currently relevant. And then when it comes to city planning, for example, can we actually give space in a city back to nature and have nature-based solutions around rivers? Then if that's something that's easy to do and there aren't as many stakeholder interests involved that would prevent that situation, then it can happen rather quickly, because it's not necessarily that cost intensive, and it can have co-benefits for tourism, for example. If you make areas around rivers more attractive, or you can have recreation areas there. In Mannheim, for example, they extended the area around the Neckar River, and they put basketball courts there and so on. And if they flooded a week ago because we had heavy rain, and then the flood went back and you just had to clean the basketball courts and it was fine. But if those were houses, it would be a very different situation. But if people already own that property there, then of course they have an interest in keeping that property. And if those are voters for the next election and they organize themselves really well, then it's much harder for policymakers to make that decision and say, maybe we have to think about relocating you. So what as mentioned before in terms of the stakeholder interests and understanding and mapping them and understanding them in terms of power and interest, and then turning that into effective stakeholder management is crucial if we want to not only work on single cases and maybe make some small improvements here and there, but really scale this up, because climate change is scaling up very quickly and the impact we're experiencing.
Yeah, very interesting. And the point on relocation and displacement is quite relevant in the case of the floods. And I go to UNIDI. When we analyze the situation for Belgium, we know that quite a high number of people could be identified as being displaced and are currently not yet back at their homes. And it's also a question of whether they are able to or even want to, which I think is relevant to what you also said, Max, that apparently in Germany people do want to live at the exact same spot in the exact same way, whereas we see in the Wester Valley that smaller villages are kind of delaying that process to reorganize and restructure their city planning. Do you have any insights from that from a research perspective, or any suggestions on how that can be organized while also taking into account the needs of the citizens?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because a disaster even leads to a temporary or a long-term displacement. Sometimes it's forced displacement because there is no other option. But let's talk about the strategy in place, build back better. This is a strategy that many governments across Europe and across other countries are trying to embark. But when, as my colleague also pointed out, build back better is not integrated into recovery and response, or even insurance systems. If you have lost a house or an asset, you're exactly paid to build the same type of house in the exactly same place. So the Build Back Better is hanging somewhere, and the insurance policy and recovery plans are hanging somewhere else. We need better coordination. And Europe, in general, as a region, prides itself to embark on multi-level governance. I think we need to operationalize these nitty-gritties of multi-level governance to strengthen the confusion, to remove the confusion between the strategic and the operational management systems, but also to strengthen how you can mitigate long-term impacts on citizens. Could they be allocated maybe alternative places to build which have less risk, which are less risk zones? And these systems have seen in also in Canada. I mean, after a disaster, there is a possibility of reassessment by the state, where you can have risk hotspots. So if you're allocating lands or you're building a house in a risk hotspot, you are subjected to pay more taxes. You're subjected to take that risk coefficient in your own planning. So the burden falls on an individual because you have been informed about the risk. But I think if individuals are given permit to build without the information on risk, then of course there's a recipe of disaster, because people plan without understanding consequences. So I think that plugging that into policy on urban planning, on land relocation, on tenure rights is crucial and important.
Yes, and if I can then go to you, Sanae, we know from migration and spacement research that if you are being displaced and you lose your livelihood, that has quite an impact on your mental health and health in general. Has this been also researched in the context of the floods? Not only the impact of the floods, but also what happened in the aftermath related to displacement, for example?
Okay, I think that's a very nice question, and also a little bit more following up from what Nidhi mentioned. I think like also Max said, quite some population in Germany want to build the same, same place, same house in the same location, and of course there will be like some emotional attachment to it. Like they raised their family in the house, and then they know the landscape, they know the place and neighbors, all the part of their life. That's one thing. But other thing is, very often after this kind of event happened, the price of the land, price of the area drops. And then even some household probably, might be planning to move away from more like higher levels of the area and so on. But still it's, difficult to resell, difficult to sell the land, sell the property to move to different location. Like there are several constraints need to be sorted out, but also not only that, like settings, but also this kind of like emotional attachment need to be well taken care, because then the people who migrate or they move to different location, of course, will be, different prospect, but also, the dragging into the past previously they had in the original location would remain. So that's why this need to be also taken care.
Thank you. And what is also relevant in that context is, as you mentioned, on vulnerable populations. I think we all know there's a social gradient as well with what happened during the floods. And from other sessions we heard there's like this double burden also on mental health for vulnerable groups, socially economically disadvantaged groups. Is that something that was also focused on in the work? And are there a few key insights in that regard, Sanae?
So definitely the already like existing vulnerabilities, and then this kind of a situation happened, that even the impact is even more intensified. So that's why some people might feel stuck or like forced to move. So like this kind of things also need to be considered. So, and then for that particular, the mental health, like a psychological support system should be more established, but also they need to be customized, because every situation, every region, every event different, and how impact the population is different. And if you look at this marginalized the population or with special vulnerabilities, it's even more situations difficult as well. So that's why this needs to be considered as well.
Okay, great. And then perhaps the last question also for Max. with regards to vulnerability, I think the topic of just transition is also quite central here at COP28, and we see in national governments more and more discussions are taking place on how can we reach our climate goals while leaving no one behind, which is like the focal point of just transition. Is that something that you see on the Germany level to be taken into account as well upon analysis of events like this?
Excellent question. That's an issue that is of really high importance in Germany, but I also think in the Benelux region for several reasons. For one, it's the right thing to do. It's ethical to leave no one behind and to make sure that everyone's perspective is included in the process and that we ideally can come up with solutions that everyone benefits from. For that, we have to embrace the complexity of the decision-making process and understand where there are potential synergies of different kinds of solutions, but where there might be trade-offs, and to understand what we can do to avoid them. But it's also a major political issue. If we think about the democracy challenges of the transformation process and the challenges that we're seeing with rising populist parties, for example, then that is a high priority for governments to make sure that the transition is as just as possible and that it is also perceived that way. We often also see a difference between the perception and the actual impact of the policy, so it also requires effective communication to ensure that the ones that are concerned are understood. Why are they concerned, and how can we tailor policies in a way that we're effective in terms of mitigation, adaptation, resilience building, but we also make sure that people understand that this transformation is happening if we want it or not, because climate change doesn't care about us. It will happen, it is happening. The question is, what are we making of it, and how can we ensure that democracies in this case can persevere?
Okay, great. All right, then I would like to go just a final few words on from all the panelists on what do you think are the key pathways towards better interregional cooperation in the light of the floods and future events, and how this integration of efforts can be improved. Just a few lines, Nidhi.
Okay, so point one, need to develop capacity of communities, people, citizens on the risks from compounding and cascading impacts of climate change. So make information available in a format that is easily digestible by communities. Don't give them IPCC reports, please. Number two, I think we need to tailor our early warning systems to specific disaster events. The flood early warning systems, how much time from deployment of early warning system to action, and who should be doing what. So delegation of authority should be relooked. And I think there are gaps and needs to be relooked in that dimension. I would also say that insurance should be also deliberated with communities, because it is more or less now a state subject, or between state and private actors. The community component is completely missing in insurance discussions. Perhaps there are needs from communities that are not even reflected in existing documentation. So have a discussion with communities. Is this something that you would like to include in insurance? That you felt that was lost, but you didn't really get covered for that. The other thing is that increase regional coordination on disaster risk governance, disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction. And this is an opportunity for the European states to work together. Climate change is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. So let's also wear the opportunity lens. I think that will help us to strengthen regional cooperation, multi-level governance. Last but not the least, transformative pathways. Very heavy word. To be able to decode what it means, we need clear solutions, clear understanding of how to enable cooperation and trust between the state and the citizens. I have emphasized on the trust deficit that this event in particular caused between the state and the citizens. So I think there's an opportunity to use climate diplomacy, climate governance to boost and to kind of reinstate that trust. And I think, again, more emphasis on addressing psychosocial needs of people, addressing pre-existing vulnerabilities. So, of course, that goes unsaid.
Great, thank you, Nidhi. Over to you, Sanae.
Okay. I have 4 points. The most importantly, cross-border collaboration, like cross-border vulnerability, this need to be really, really recognized. For that, there are several points. The resource sharing, like knowledge and research and innovation, this kind of things need to be shared and need to be understood across the borders. And also the inclusive policy development. Of course, these countries neighboring, so we need to also make sure the policy each country develop has some inclusivity with each other. And also the sharing knowledge about water management and also infrastructure development and also land use planning. These 3 things are key for make the nature-based solutions. This idea should be very well understood across the border and between 3 countries. So a second one is integrated water management. And this also always need to consider the interconnected nature risks and climate change, but also the need to have transparency and accountability. This integrated water management also need to be understood from the citizen level. And often these informations are not so transparent for the most of the community, so this need to be understood well. And the third one is community engagement to build resilience. As I mentioned earlier, and also some of my colleagues mentioned, how this emergency, the warning system is understood, where you get all the answers, where the shelter, this kind of things that need to have for the community and the citizens to take any action, take any response. So that's why information accessibility need to be revisited and need to make sure that every single citizen knows what to do in the case of emergency. And for that, we need to develop capacity development campaigns. Everyone need to have access, everyone need to know it. And the fourth one is facilitate research and innovation. And this try to utilize these researchers, try to make the research out of this topic, because this is a very nice touch point, and then also reach out not only among researchers, but also seek for the collaboration with the private partner, public partners. This is 4 things. And these things always need to consider very strong interconnectedness of environmental and social and psychological factors. These are the things we can try to make the psychological and society resilience. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Over to you, Max.
Yes, I support all of the points that were just being made. I will highlight 3 main aspects. One is we need a better evidence base, not just in terms of exposure and vulnerability. That is really important to have better understanding of vulnerability assessments in specific regions and the needs for resilience building and adaptation there as well. But then we also need better forms of stakeholder engagement that go along with capacity building. We saw, for example, that some events are considered black swan events, so they aren't taken seriously, and that can have tremendous negative impact. And one way to deal with this, for example, are scenario workshops, where you can bring together various different stakeholder groups from policy, from affected populations, from academia, and develop different scenarios together that can at the same time build capacity and help us to understand this complexity better and afterwards develop plans. So we know which tools are there, we need to use them more, and also understand that we require more long-term thinking and not just the short-term consequences, because scenario workshops, for example, require capacity, they require resources, and they will only show long-term effects. And they are often hard to understand, how does this help me right now? But it has shown that this can have tremendous effects later on. And the third point is that we then also need to have more evidence-based decision-making as well. We have a huge evidence base, we have a lot of knowledge, but we don't always turn that into action, into practice. So I would ask policymakers to also read the policy briefs that you have developed and make decisions based on the evidence base that we have.
Great points. So to conclude in detail here, Nidhi talking about community management and engagement, really important to also have the voice of citizens and the affected areas involved. Then Sanae moved also on this cross-border resilience building, if I can summarize it in that way, as a really focal point. And then the insights on scenario workshops are really interesting to detect the long-term effects. And obviously, evidence-based decision-making should be the focal point of where our policymakers are basing their decisions on. So I would like to give the final floor or words to our Deputy Director from UNU EHS, the Institute for Environment and Human Security, who is one of the 3 UNUs involved in the UNU initiative on the floods. Prof. Zita Zebesfari, please give us a few closing remarks on and reflections on what our panelists have shared today. And the perspective of the UNUs on further research in this regard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the panelists and for all the insights. I would like to zoom out a little bit from the discussion we had and connect it also a bit to the more global discussions. So the first point I would like to raise that just shortly after the flood event, I think 1 or 2 days after the event happened, there was an interview given by Salim Hook, who just recently, unfortunately, passed away. And he said that Bangladesh is standing by to support Germany in times of crisis. And the background to his interview was that Bangladesh has overcome flood events with a huge amount of death toll and many, many people losing their lives. And Bangladesh tremendously improved its early warning system, but also flood shelter provision and basically managed to save life on a large scale. And why I am saying this, I am raising this point because I think that here's also an opportunity for global learning, not only looking at the 3 countries involved here, but more zooming out. And this comes back to what Maximilian said about attribution. So more and more events are actually attributable to climate change impacts. And there's a tremendous knowledge available in the global south, in the countries which are at the forefront of climate change impacts. We felt back in time that the UNU institutes are actually well positioned to come together and look into these events because most of our research is actually taking place in developing countries in the global south. So many flood risk related projects have been undertaken in the different UNU institutes in the past, but in a developing country context. So it was for us also a learning experience to come with all that knowledge to Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and look at what happened here and what knowledge we can actually transfer also from the developing country context which we know best. Some specific reflections. So, Nidhi mentioned the role of insurance, and there's a growing concern globally that there are some limits of insurability. We have been seeing this in Australia to floods, but also in Florida or in California to fire risk. And the concern is that if we are not addressing the underlying risk, the shifting risk landscape driven by climate change, we might lose insurance, which we are using today as one piece of the disaster risk management strategy. So insurance is addressing the residual risk after we did mitigation, adaptation, and still impacts are encountering. And if we basically losing that tool, we will have really difficulties to help people to recover. So just looking into the larger picture, I think there's a lot we can do and we have to do to actually keep insurance as part of the toolbox, so to say. Another reflection on Sunny's comments, we oftentimes look at the impacts of disasters or climate change impacts on mental health. And comparably little is being done in the other way around, but you also mentioned, so what are actually the impacts of issues around mental health for our ability to plan a more transformative adaptation? So as long as we are actually trapped in this context of loss and grief, how far we can actually plan to not just rebuild the house at the same place, but to think forward. What are other opportunities for me, for my family, but also for the community? And I think this is a hugely under-researched part of the puzzle, which would be really nice if more attention could be paid to. In terms of what Maximilian said, so black swan events, I think in the context of climate change, we will see them more and more. Like you might remember the Texas cold wave, this huge cold wave in Texas, which led to many people actually losing their life, but also livelihood. That region is just not prepared for that kind of events, and it was influenced, so to say, by changes in the Arctic. Or the heat waves in Europe, which are now increasingly happening. So Germany is taking action now, but France was exposed to that kind of heat 20 years ago. So France actually started to change the entire policy landscape around heat some years ago now, and Germany has taken that learning path actively, actually mentioning how it has been done in France and what can we learn from it. But this shows us that it takes many years, and in many countries it takes this own experience until we actually react. Maybe also a reflection to a number you said this 40 billion loss and damage in Germany after one event. And to connecting it again to the global picture, we all know the broken promise of the 100 billion to be paid by 2020 yearly from wealthy nations to the countries who are experiencing the impacts of climate change most. So just put this in relation. We are talking here about one event, 40 billion loss and damage, and we are talking about not delivering 100 billion from all wealthy nations towards vulnerable countries. So I think when we are talking about equity, justice, and just transitions, those are just the dimensions we have to keep in mind. And that might help us also to act. And coming back to what said, costs of inaction. The costs of inaction are so tremendously high, we can't afford it. So we really need to act. And I think probably that's a good point to close. And I would like to thank to all involved, also from my side, and giving back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those closing remarks. And I think indeed the cost of inaction will be higher than adequately preparing, and that's very relevant to what happened during those floods. Okay, I would like to thank you all, panelists, for your insights and contributions today. And we can wrap up here, and I hope to work together in the future. And I think we can adequately disseminate these findings. And yeah, indeed, let's hope we can go for more action and inaction towards what happens in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.